have been supportive of that, assuming that the EU, assuming that Turkey meets the criteria established by the EU. If I just may, one of my first visits, I went down to the, I forget what city it was now, but to the Labour Party conference. And Jack Straw was the foreign minister. He said, "You've got to get the secretary on the phone. We need some help lobbying somebody for that first stage that occurred, I think, in the end of 2005, beginning of 2006. And I was able to do that, and we were able to do our lobbying. And you have crossed the first, or the EU has crossed the first threshold when you're negotiating with Turkey. So we believe as a country that, certainly this administration, that if Turkey meets the criteria, they should be let into the EU. We could probably talk about the rest of the night, but let me try to put it concisely as I possibly can. Every person who comes to Guantanamo Bay is reviewed to see if they belong in Guantanamo Bay. Secondly, as you pointed out, well, not as you pointed out, but secondly, they can now have the right to get a public or private attorney in which to hear their case. Let's say they say you have to stay in Guantanamo Bay, but the person doesn't agree. They can get a private attorney, and their case is heard before a federal appeals court. Thirdly, every year a reviewing body looks at the remaining detainees on an individual case-by-case basis to see if they still should be remanded to Guantanamo, or still should remain in Guantanamo Bay. Because of that, hundreds and thousands of potential detainees and detainees have gone through Guantanamo and have been released. We're down to just over, I believe it's just over 300. The difficulty with those remaining 300 is that in some cases we think that they're still serious threats and should not be released. And the courts have seen it the way the administration has called it from that issue. In other cases, their home countries, we're worried if we send them back there, they will be tortured or something worse. And then thirdly, we've had trouble getting them, other countries to take them. We had a great deal of difficulty. It was about a year and a half ago. We released 10 leaders. And the only country that would take them is Albania. Now, as you may be aware, the UK has requested the return of the remaining 5 UK residents. And we are looking at that right now, and I suspect there will be some action on them shortly. Lastly, student visas. And Lisa, our Consul General is here, so if you have any specific problems, I'll let you talk to her. There's no question that after 9/11, that getting visas and even getting in the country, travel all over the world was much more difficult. I can tell you, I happened to be in the State Department in January of 2006, and they said, "Oh, the president's coming to speak today." So I said, "Oh, great, I want to go hear that." So it was in an auditorium not unlike this one. And he had gathered together the top 120 universities in the United States. And he had 2 messages for them. And one was, we're not doing a good job of teaching foreign languages. And I've seen recently that has improved. The number of the interest in foreign languages has gone up. And secondly, we needed to do a better job of encouraging students to come to the United States. So I know, and he has also worked in asking Secretary Rice and Secretary Sherdoff, who's head of Homeland Security, to do a better job of making it easier, still wanting security, to have students get visas. You can make an appointment in London by phone, and you can go online and fill out your application. So we're trying to make it easier. Is it perfect? No. We're doing everything we can to make it easier. Did I miss anything in that list? Okay. All right. One more question.
Okay. Who wants to have the last word? Tom. You mentioned a lot about climate change in your speech, which I'm sure everyone here will welcome that. But I was wondering why the US, like the Bush administration, has been so reluctant to commit to binding international targets on greenhouse emissions. I know you mentioned that different countries have different approaches to dealing with climate issues, but it seems difficult to take the matter extremely seriously and yet avoid any serious benchmarks.
I think just as a matter of policy, the President hasn't felt that that's the best way to go about it. Having said that, he's the first president in 20 years who's called legislation to increase the gas mileage in our vehicles. As I said, he's authorized the expenditure of $37 billion on development and deployment of climate change technologies. So I think he's gone a long way, and I think this meeting that the President called for, that I mentioned briefly in my speech in September, was the first time the major emitters, I think it was 80% of the world's emitters, were sitting around the table. So I think I think he's done lots of things to work together. And it's just not, as a matter of policy, he just doesn't believe in binding targets. But there's a young lady here, my wife would always say, let's not end with a man, let's end with a lady. So I'll give you the last question. It's all right, make it easy.
I was just wondering, you were talking about AIDS assistance earlier.
Yes.
But how, from what I hear, President Bush seems to advocate abstinence-only AIDS prevention. So how has that sort of impacted the amount of money and the supplies which have been given to that?
I'm not an expert on that particular issue, but there was some debate about that earlier in the administration. But yes, it's called ABC. You want to answer the question? Well, look, this is our Consul General, Lisa, and she can probably do a better job than I.
I actually know quite a bit about ABC. The information that the ambassador mentioned, obviously you're familiar with the program, ABC for Africa, which stands for Abstinence, Be Faithful, and Kindness. There is a misapprehension that, or a bit of misunderstanding, that in fact we don't support the C, we're only concerned about the A and the E. And that's not true. We've actually supplied to the tune of about 37 billion condoms individually to Africa every year. They're distributed through USAID. So that's an awful lot of prevention to go along with the money that we've spent on the antiretrovirals, as well as on education, prevention, stigma reduction, and a number of other programs that are going on as part of the Millennium Fund, as well as part of the Global Fund and PEPFAR, which is the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS relief.
Right. Okay, well, on that note, I'm afraid that we have to draw the meeting to a close, but can you all join me in thanking the Ambassador very much for staying in a bit longer to answer our questions. It's got to get off back to London now, but we really appreciate you coming here today, and thank you very much, everyone, for coming. Just before we close, could I ask you to just remain in your seats for another minute or two? James is going to make some announcements whilst the official party departs, but can you all please join me? Thank you.